Kingston Kan Podcast.
All right, Eric, Brock, thank you for coming all the way here. I just want to put a little disclaimer. Eric's a filmmaker. What you see in this podcast is not Eric's sins. It's my sins, but he's not responsible for this. Little disclaimer. Eric is a filmmaker. Eric, tell me a little bit about yourself, just in regards to your background.
So I loved acting, and my dad loves me, and so does my mom and dad. And there was no internet. So he went to the library and sat me down and just wanted to give me the reality that 5% of SAG actors actually make a living acting. And he dug this up pre-internet. So that's impressive.
It's love.
Yes. Like we'll go back to my history. I've been bugging you to have the conversation, and we've started having a little bit before, but the whole definition of an artist, because I've never liked that term. An artist, I think, gets slung around so much. And also,
It's a big tent, though.
Well, artist is also something people can identify with as the way they dress. You know, a lot of times people are like, oh, well, they're artsy. Look at the way they dress. But I mean, and I know it's a controversial day we live in, but just because you dress a certain way does not mean you are a certain thing.
Right. Remember middle school basketball when the dude that had all the gear, like you threw a ball at him in the face? There's an artist version of this where Dust protest too much or Dust wear the right clothes too much.
Right.
No, I think that's true.
And I think people, like, an artist is an attractive concept. And I think a lot of people, they want to be artists.
Right.
So,
or contrarians, maybe something in that whole neck of the woods, right?
A lot of people aren't artists. I just was listening to something, and I believe it was with Jordan Peterson.
I think I know what you're referring to. How few, I heard the same podcast, how few people of the population are actually creative. That was amazing.
1 in 10, I think.
Yeah, it was very low percentage.
Do personality test. And the amazing part of that podcast, and this is where I wanted to get to you about, we were debating artist, you know, and how I don't really like the moniker. I'm comfortable with creative. Like when people say, like, you know, oh, he's a creative, that's a term that's kind of started making the rounds in the last couple of years. People will be like, oh,
yeah, because it's also it's a professional label.
They're
now.
creative, yes. You know, like my wife, she's a she's a creative director. Well, it's in the title. She's obviously creating things. And the thing with Jordan Peterson's podcast I thought was really interesting was, how do you judge who, like an artist, basically, do they create? You know, because I agree with you. Anybody can wear the crazy clothes and put eye makeup on and walk around, and people be like, "Wow, they're
or
quite the
say
artist."
Controversial things."
Yes,
right.
And like you were saying, like say wild stuff, be out on a branch, and yes, they feel artisty, but do they create anything?
Yeah, I agree with you.
And when Jordan Peterson said that, I was like, I do think it is more difficult. You know, we are useless at the end of the world, and I maintain that, but it's also not an easy thing, because the person was like, well, how can you tell? You know, I forget who he was speaking with. The other person was just like,
push back a little bit. Yeah,
they push back. But he was like, no. Have you written a book? Have you written a script? Have you painted a portrait? And when you think about that, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that don't do that.
The vast majority of people don't do it. But I think it's a little bit of a curse, actually. I've thought a lot about this, Eric, since I've had sons. Like, when you have a child, you start thinking, hey, what if I could, which you can't, by the way. The genetics just get dealt like a hand of cards. But if I could break down, you know, a piecemeal version of my own experience and baton pass this to my kids. An interesting question for somebody that's really lived with this kind of life for a number of decades now. Would you do it? You live a little further outside of the norm. You have this weird, most creatives I know have this very weird tug of war in them. They struggle with contentment. They're very difficult. Civil wars playing out in their own minds. There's all kinds of psychological baggage to that. I would even cite you the great creatives of history. Some of them are like cutting off body parts and going completely mad. I don't think that's that weird, because I think they're driven crazy by this like itch that cannot be scratched. And every creative will relate to that on some level. Once you bite of that fruit, you can never go back. It's not that wonderful of a thing. I mean, like, it hasn't, what I'm describing is the underbelly. There are wonderful things about being a creative, but that's a real underbelly. And I'd be surprised if most creatives don't agree with that. I think there's a lot of like bittersweet in there. And I wonder if my kid is going to live his fullest, best life with that or not? You know, I really have found myself wondering that. At the end of the day, I don't control these things anyway.
Right.
But it's an interesting question. We both have sons.
Yeah.
You have to ask yourself, would you really want him to have that?
You know, if we could pick, obviously. And me and my wife have a little bit of a push and pull because, to be honest, I'm right now especially very much like, dude, I want them to do their best. I'm encouraging them. My wife's much more focused on college. Like in that, you know, well, you want to go to college, and I'm much more focused on like trade school's cool. You know, like
I'm right there with you.
You can make a lot of money being an AC repairman, being a plumber, being a carpenter. No,
those guys are the real deal.
They're salt of the earth.
Yeah,
I mean it's and
making magic happen.
The 90s got it wrong because the whole 90s was go to college or you're a loser. And I just keep saying to my wife, because she'll be like, well, college is real. And I'm like,
You and I grew up in the same generation. We grew up in a really, really similar household where faith was taken very, very seriously. Our values were taken very, very seriously. As a result of that, I was exposed to anything to do with creativity and art was highly sanitized. And I look back on that now, and I don't want to call it like trauma, but I want to call it like we are what we eat in our childhood and in our upbringing. And whatever that did to me put me in this really uneasy relationship where art meets faith. It put me in not a hostile relationship, but one that just doesn't feel comfortable ever. The way I like to put it is the one camp feels wrong because they won't do anything that doesn't crowbar their faith into the moment, whether that feels natural or is real. The other side, I call them Christian haters. They're just embarrassed. There's a cowardice to it, I've discovered. I have artist friends like this. I hate just as much how that feels. And all that stuff to me sits in this tug of war, discontentment place. I don't like the way I feel about it. I don't think either camp has it right. I don't know what the sweet spot is. I know you and I have enough childhood common ground and enough artistic common ground that I know you're going to have a take on it. Where does art meet faith? Where's the sweet spot there? How do you personally navigate it with your own work?
You know, I remember my dad specifically coming in the room, and I don't know if my brother was a Striper fan.
Oh, yeah, baby.
I'll be honest.
To hell with the devil.
Not my bag. I
committed too hard to that.
I was more Krumbacher.
Oh, yeah,
if you remember Krumbacher, I love Krumbacher, and I was a big The Choir. Like,
The Choir.
Dude, to this day, like,
The Choir's got some great records, man.
But my dad coming in, and but he was just like, I don't see how this glorifies God.
Right.
And I think part of it comes from that it was, if something doesn't say Jesus in it.
Check boxes, yeah.
Enough.
Yeah.
It clearly couldn't be Christian music.
Right.
Or Christian art.
Or edifying.
And if it addressed, and I love The Choir because The Choir honestly had a lot of songs that, you know, related to human experience, but weren't necessarily, you know, didn't check the boxes for maybe, you know, driving people to the altar.
Yeah, I would argue that The Choir would be a band that prioritized just the creative endeavor for the creative endeavor's sake.
Yes.
A little higher than the average, like, stereotypical Christian band would.
And I think that's probably, and kind of what you're talking about is there is almost that percentage that, like, I think most Christians weigh. And I think the Christian church does is they say, you know, if this isn't Christian enough, if the message isn't enough, if you're not pushing out art that is literally has this exact message in it, well, you're not doing kingdom work. And I disagree.
No, let me ask you a question. Do you think that we're slaying a dragon that's already been slayed in this sense? Do you think that was something that the church was guilty of, say, 10, 15 years ago, but has sort of learned the lesson now? And I ask that only because we might be speaking out of our 1990s trauma, and here we are all these years later, and I really do see self-correction in the church. So I just want to be fair to that. Although I still think, even if the church, big C, and even if a lot of those like tropes and those, the thing that you just very well frameworked out, even if that still exists, it probably doesn't exist as sharply as it used to. I think there is a little bit more room for latitude. I would cite you some interesting bands that are doing some interesting things that seem to be fairly accepted, whereas bands in the 90s that were doing that were very clearly outcast. So I think there's been some movement, but my real reason for asking it is even if it is just an outcropping of our childhood, it was very real then and has had an impact on us. And I'm going to go as far as to say I think anybody my age, this has had an impact on them. And I think overall my experience has been it's had a negative impact.
I mean, I do think we've made progress.
Yeah.
Have we learned a lesson?
Right.
I would say no. And I'd say no because there are no major TV networks run by like churches. Like realistically, what we need now more than anything, and if we really learned the culture lesson, instead of the Daily Wire just announced they're putting $100 million into kids program,
which I want to talk to you about,
which is totally amazing.
Amazing.
If you think about all the money in the bigger churches, the mega churches, if we really understood culture and how culture changes, there would be a fourth major TV, which nowadays there would be a streaming network, and you do have some little ones.
Yeah, like I subscribe to PureFlix and stuff like that.
There's some little things,
but it's a hodgepodge of everything you don't want to watch.
In a lot of ways,
it really
like
is.
Some of those are.
I have it for my kids,
and again, a lot of the times too, like the programming on that stuff, it's still very, leaning heavily toward preaching at somebody than it is about giving quality entertainment.
Yeah. I've thought about this so much. Like for example, the real basic question you're asking is, how many times do we got to get our butts handed to us by the culture before we get in the game, right? I thought about this forever. And then you think about how many hundreds of churches are just in America alone with these war chests that they spend on whatever. It can't be that nobody sees it. That's not the answer. I think this is the ugly truth that we're really circling around here. The kind of art that would impact a non-Christian religious culture would not satisfy the desires of your average pew-dwelling church giver, right?
I agree.
But the average content that would satisfy the average pew giver, offering giver, would not meet the goal of moving and changing the culture. So in lies the rub. You got two competing interests that do not share the same goals. And I think that's why all these attempts to do it always fail, because nobody's happy in the end, right? And that begs the question, since it fails so often, I almost wonder, I think most Christians have said, I guess we're just not supposed to be doing that because it always ends in disaster. That's 100% the wrong way to look at it. And I seriously don't know how many times that we have to look at the religion, which is leftism. Leftism in our modern society postures itself in every way as a religion. And that religion very, very clearly understands the power of this and has reaped windfall success as a result of taking it very, very seriously. And in many ways has reaped the harvest of our own children because they take that seriously and we do not. Ironically enough, the most fantastical success has come about from arguably a mentally unstable Mel Gibson, which literally changed the world with the passion, but willing to take what you're saying seriously.
But had to be self-financed. Again, of all things, why wouldn't churches get behind that to try to finance it?
The answer is so puzzling. I don't even have a...
And what's funny is the same average church pew goer, and we shouldn't generalize, but the same people who will say, well, we shouldn't give money to this, say, project because it doesn't have enough of a message. Let's just say that. Those same people will go home and watch
they'll partake of the world's finest entertainment and be unsatisfied. Yes, Game of Thrones.
I had to think of it. My brain hurt. And I remember my pastor one time saying from the pulpit, he's like, hey, just so you know, like in a side note, he's like, I hear you guys talking out there about the shows you're watching, but I know enough to know you shouldn't be watching them.
Right.
But the point is, we can make those shows, not Game of Thrones, but you could also make shows that deal in reality, that are edifying in a subtler way, but move the needle.
What they are is their worldview endorsing entertainment. That's what it is, rather than it's worldview endorsing entertainment, which is not enough Christian sex appeal to get it financed, but ironically enough is going to move the football down the field so much faster, which lands us right here in talking about diaconia. So one of the reasons I was intrigued by this little seed of an idea that you have is it really accomplishes this, Eric. It really does. And this is why I love the Word of God. I actually love it. And as in the last 10 years, I've fallen in love with it. It's intriguing. It's interesting. It's boundless and endless. I read it and unearth all kinds of wisdom, even though it's seemingly from a bunch of sheep herders. I mean, the whole thing is a mystical narrative of epic proportions, and I'll cite you how it's changed the course of human history if you really want to go rounds with me on this. But the point is it's a vibrant, if you're not sharing in my love of Jesus and in my belief in his kingdom and the consummate kingdom, let's just agree on this. It's a vibrant piece of literature composed of insanely cool narratives that I would argue Hollywood is ripping off all the time and just renaming. So for the first time when I talked to you, you pitched me this idea that not only do I think is cinematically worthy of bringing to the screen, but it just so happened to hit me at the same time when I was grappling with the concept myself. So I married this more Pentecostal, this lovely woman of God, but has been raised in a Pentecostal background, right?
I was raised Pentecostal.
Yeah. You guys, you can't worship God without a couple snakes around. So like, here's the deal with you guys. So the point is my wife has really challenged me scripturally on the vibrancy of these gifts and how they play out in believers right now and should play out. Whereas I kind of grew up in that, like, if you even have 3 or 4 people, bringing the skin hats together and making a little noise, everybody's just getting uncomfortable with the fact that that's how far away I was from my wife's upbringing. Point is, I was being scripturally challenged and I was being theologically challenged, and then my wife was really moving the needle. And so were brothers and sisters in Christ who really were challenging me on this. So you come and you tell me this really cool idea about how to bring the original, the OG superpowers.
Yeah.
How do we graft these right into the life we live right now in unconventional ways, just like these Marvel superheroes do? They always bring the packaging in this compelling, out of left field way that you just don't see coming, which is why it's so intriguing and you want more and more of it. And then the biggest selling point for me, Eric, was how do these spiritual gifts manifested in these characters amplify each other and interact with each other, one in proximity to each other, in practicing these people. Now, that's just no cameras running, no reading the script. I've told this to many, many people. That hits your eardrum and curiosity, it immediately follows it. So that's just one really, really cool example. Why do you think believers are struggling with seeing that as having merit, kingdom relevance? Why do we not check boxes like we do, say, if you said something like, this is going to be a story about a preacher who starts to struggle with the drink, but then is right on the brink of throwing it all away, but gets up there and delivers that really poorly written final climactic scene where he preaches to his church. Like that brings all the Christian dollars to the yard. What's your take on why there's a lost in translation?
Gotcha. I love the question. The projects that do have the preacher that had too much difficulty with the drink.
I just struggle with that booze, Eric.
I understand. It's a tough one. I don't know that they necessarily have an easy path. I don't think the church in general is.
Oh, I see what you mean.
I think even
it's the
those
entire
projects,
venue.
I mean, I can tell you from a filmmaking and a television standpoint, it's hard to get a project off the ground no matter what it is. I don't think if I wrote that script, if I wrote the lady of the night that's seen the wrong ways and is brought to God through this, gentleman, I don't think anyone would be throwing
the Christian version of Pretty Women.
Yes.
Okay. I think I might have seen that one on Pureflix.
But I don't think either they're like churches would throw millions of dollars at me. I do think we, as say people like churches and the entities, it's to so many people unrealistic.
So is it one of these things where the only thing possible are the things I've seen done? Yeah. So it kind of sits like in that place.
I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
But again, I think churches in general, like, this isn't our wheelhouse because no one's ever made it our wheelhouse.
It's crazy that it's not our wheelhouse.
I know, but I mean, at the same time, though, I don't, you would need people to play nice together, because to actually make that media company, you need people to play nice together. You need churches, multi-denominational groups to come together.
Yeah, this is true.
Because one denomination is not going to fund, say, a TV network. It'd be so much like, well, that's not Christian enough. That's not. But I think in the church kind of suffers from that, because it's almost like the church is one big small town, in that to understand and conceptualize this. That's, I think, one of your biggest problems.
Here's an interesting question. If not literally seeing the fruits of not doing it for now 2-3 generations, I don't know, as long as Hollywood has been saturating the culture, convinced us of it. Here's a bleak thought. Is it just something that the church is just not going to be convinced of? On paper, the lesson would have been learned the hard way already, in that our children have been much more influenced by their Netflix stream than they have their Sunday school class by this point. So what would give his church like the right bloody nose enough to learn this lesson?
Well, there's Christians out there that are doing stuff. I mean, because with Diaconia, I'm trying to pursue different, Pure Flix and places.
We talked about Daily Wire. They're getting it.
But not Daily Wire gets it, but they get it from, so I'm a little nervous with them. Like, I'm trying to make inroads right now. But like, their whole point is they want to make media, that they want to make entertainment that's just entertainment. And again, so Diaconia can be problematic to somebody like that, maybe, because, well, but you're really pushing an agenda, like it can be, to them it might look like I'm pushing too much of an agenda. To a church, it's like it's not getting pushed enough. And I think that's where the church is missing the boat. What the Daily Wire is trying to do is just exactly what we need right now, is somebody that's just putting out entertainment, putting out just quality things that you can watch, that run the gamut of children's to adults to this and that, but doesn't have those underlying subversive messages just shoved in at you.
Yeah.
Where the church, I think, the church actually could do better.
They're not only building that, but something I just realized they're doing, they're also waiting for the Goliath to make a mistake, and then they're gobbling up that market. So, case in point, all this, the Florida bill stuff is it's such madness. Yeah. Like, it doesn't even require a political loyalty to see that that's madness, right? 6, 7, 8-year-old kid doesn't need to know about sex stuff. If you're on the side of the kid needs to know about sex stuff, you should probably be arrested. What that has to do with this conversation is they immediately move in on Disney's market share. Yeah. And in this way, that's a stroke of genius. Same thing with that Star Wars debacle. He saw that they fumbled, and he just gobbled that up, and he got that on the cheap too for like $1 million, $2 million. He bought up her contract because she just wanted freedom. I think they're going to have success in the sense that they're just going to death by a million cuts. I mean, Hollywood's just going to give it up, but the church is not.
See, I don't
seeing
know.
that.
Yeah, like. Ben Shapiro and Jeremy Boring are just, like you said, I think that they're seeing those gaps and saying like, okay, we'll take it.
And they're right, by the way.
And there's a lot of people out there that want them to
succeed.
That want them and want to support them. And I think the church should have, could have, and can learn the same lesson. And they could lean into it even more, though, than the Daily Wire, say, is going to, which I don't know. Maybe they'll lean in, maybe they won't. If you think about the Hallmark Channel, the Hallmark Channel, I'm not a fan. I don't watch those
I am
movies.
At Christmas time. I know I get no man points for admitting it. But at Christmas time, a trance comes over me. I watch crap cinema for like a month. I mean, garbage cinema. But I get to feels. I get to Christmas feels.
But the church could make products and have a channel that at Christmas time, they are putting out their own Hallmark
That's a stroke of genius.
Christmas movies.
That's a stroke of genius.
I mean, how and they could lean in a little bit. But it's original content. Everyone wants original content right now, and that's what everyone's trying to pump out as fast as they can. But the movies could all be, first and foremost, I mean, okay, as good as Hallmark Entertainment. No offense, Hallmark Channel. I'll gladly make
they're
movies
printing money.
You.
They don't care what you think.
I'll gladly make movies with you. Call me. I'll write something. But at the same time, I am not too good for you.
Here's the plot. We got a middle-aged woman. She's struggling with the love life. She decides to head north.
She can't find love.
Maybe south. She meets a shockingly handsome single man, and it all culminates in this picturesque house with all these cool levels to it, with good-looking people drinking eggnog and having great conversations. We pan out, Eric. We pan out. Crappy soundtrack. Roll credits. Let's take that check to the bank.
You know.
You need a One Tree Hill actor.
Yes.
That calendar is going to flip, Eric, and next year this is going to be just as fresh as. That's, by the way, I know I'm making a joke, but that's the genius of Hallmark. It is. That stuff never ages out.
No.
Because next year you forgot you watched that.
Because you watched it once or twice over the holiday season. Yeah. And next year you're like,
genius.
This seems familiar. And you watch it again.
The advantage that the Daily Wire has, though, and we're going right back to the origin story of this conversation, they can be very just human, and they can be very almost edgy and salty, and they can kind of be what people are sort of used to, because they're not going to have the tyranny, the yoke, the creative yoke that the church is going to demand on artists. And we're right back to square one. Is the entire endeavor doomed to fail because of that original problem, which is the Christian just demands that you only operate in this MP3 sonic bandwidth of creativity. Anything outside of this, like if you want to go to like the WAV file, man, no good. Even though there's so much human experience out here in this sound register, I would argue that has always been the problem with Christian art not resonating with people. Yeah. And again, you're not going to see any of this exampled in Jesus. He's mixing it up with all kinds of salty people. He's going into Samaria, which would be that'd be like our Compton. I mean, there's just all kinds of crazy stuff going on with this guy. He's not as concerned with how this is branding or what do the Sadducees and the Pharisees think. Does this check the religious box? I would argue that our mindset on Christian art could not be further from Jesus' walk on this earth. Technically, his brand would never survive on PureFlix. It's just way too much. Did you hear, Eric, that this guy? Jesus' ministry had too much proximity to the flame of the world to give him. You understand where I'm going with that?
And it's why Christian cinema and like a lot of Christian quote unquote films don't come across as films, but come across as lessons, because the people in them, and this is my opinion, and I've put thought into this as well, and when you look at them, what you realize is the people in them aren't portrayed like normal people. A lot of Christians, they'll throw a shoot a heck and a darn out there.
Shoot a heck and a darn?
Shoot heck and a darn. And yet, in a Christian film, if someone drops, a heck or a darn,
somebody hits their finger with a hammer.
People though recoil, like, well, this can't be a Christian film. Right. It has heck and darn in it, and shoot, But so the dialogue ends up stilted, and people have conversations that you never hear, like normal people have, because they're perfect conversations,
Right. This is a good diagnosis of it.
And
yeah.
I think that's why a lot of Christian films that are considered approved Christian films, that you're going to go to church and they're going to show Fireproof, or they're going to show, and I'm not knocking those movies. They've done amazing things.
They've cut a lot of tall grass down,
They've
actually.
done kingdom work with those. I was watching a documentary about screenwriting, and they were talking to screenwriters, and I think it applies to music, it applies to acting, it applies to filmmaking.
Why did you want to do Diaconio? Why do you care about it? And despite all of the hurdles that we just laid out, why do you think it's still worth doing? Because you obviously do.
So the idea came from, when you look at comic books, look at the comic book movies, and my kids are watching Spider-Man and all this stuff, and I'm watching them with them. My kids are all bought in that this dude gets bit by a radioactive spider, and he's spider powers. There is this whole like just bedrock
treasure trove.
And honestly, a lot of the Marvel stuff, realistically, a lot of it does trace back to biblical things.
Certainly.
Why have we missed this? Like, why don't we? And growing up Pentecostal, believing in the gifts of the Spirit, believing that this stuff is real, if they're done in that Marvel way, you actually have a way to reach a very large group of people with this. And I always joke about it. I probably said this to you. I want to make the Creed of movies, where the band Creed. I remember growing up, not a fan of Creed.
They got this cross-pollination thing going on between the secular and the sacred.
They were always argued, but there was this constant debate over them for a while, because his raising was very spiritual. Like, a lot of that came out in his songs, and so he was working through his demons. Still might be working through those demons.
My boy Scott.
they were one of the biggest bands in the country and like still they have album sales.
Oh my goodness. There are so many Creed CDs in thrift stores right now. It's unbelievable. People bought that record.
If we could do something where the gifts of the Spirit are the bedrock of the story, but they're not the story. I look at it like this. So Batman, the first Chris Nolan Batman movie, was brilliant.
Great movie.
And it was brilliant for one reason. It was a gangster movie that happened to have Batman in it. That was a real movie. It wasn't a goofy movie. Again, going back to Fireproof and those, they're lesson movies. They're teaching movies.
They're like movie tracks.
And they have a purpose.
Yeah.
They do good things in the kingdom.
They definitely do.
But generally though, they do things in the kingdom for people that are in the kingdom.
Generally, yeah.
When you show it to someone who is not a Christian, they smell what the Rock is cooking, and the Rock's cooking a lesson. That's not a movie. It's not a story. It's not compelling. I'm not going to the next episode because I can tell in the first 15 minutes, this dude is the drunken preacher. He's probably going to be okay in the end.
Right.
Where when you have a real movie and a real story, you're sitting there going, what's happening next? Who is this? What is this? Where Diaconia at its core is a real series. It's a thriller. It's a bit of a Marvel thing going on. It's a spaghetti Western, which is what I really think is cool about it, where our main lead, Alima, comes to town. She has the gift of knowledge and of wisdom, and using the gifts of the Spirit she has, she basically puts together her team, and she finds people with the other gifts, and then she has to figure out also, discern, why is she there? What is it that God has her there to stop? Which, if the writer's any good,
he's a dumpster fire.
I know, we're hoping. I know, right? You never know.
The spiritual subject matter that you're choosing to write out of is the most unpredictable and volatile of what Christian believes, which is interesting because that is maybe arguably you just made a case for why that is a problem with Christian cinema. It's very predictable. You see what's coming. It's very formula. But you try to bite off the spiritual gifts, and what you really have there's a feral animal. I mean, it's like even believers don't even know how to properly talk about this. So it's interesting that you just naturally went towards the most interesting source material that the modern church deals with. Mm-hmm. You wouldn't know where that was going even if you were a believer, because it could go so many vibrant ways. I even loved when I read through your character list. They're not coming from the same walks of life. Even their interactions with each other are probably going to be riddled with problems and disagreements and things that they don't see eye to eye on. But they do have a big tent mission. They kind of secretly are drawn by this magnetism of purpose. And then, not to give too much away, but they even amplify each other's gifts, which I've often found that to be true in my real life, where believers will just open my eyes to things, passions that they'll have, dispositional makeups that I don't possess, but it's almost like seeing through a prism. You know, you're around this person, you're like, look at all these cool colors. I didn't know that. So there's a lot there.
Yes, you're 100% right. I do We Are Lebanon PA videos, you know about. Look up We Are Lebanon PA on Facebook.
Yes, please do. It's really cool.
They're free videos I do for the community, just as a positivity campaign. I love doing those.
Look into my boy Eric in general, which I'll give you all kinds of opportunities to do in the description.
Cool.
Eric, thanks for hanging out with me, man. We're going to do it again. There's so much me and you could talk about, but
yeah, we scratched the surface barely.
Eric has a website. Give him that.
Anubis Productions, ANNUBIS Productions.com, but we're on Facebook.
And then Diaconia, hashtag Diaconia Film. And then there's a lot of stuff out there you can check out. There's short little trailers. Share this with your friends. That costs you nothing. I'm certain that our compelling conversation has moved the needle tremendously on the kingdom purpose of all of this.
$5 gets you our ending gratitude, and it's not a joke. Like $5 goes, we're like, woo! For $25 or $50 if you're a business. We have business levels that will tag your business.
And you're going to write that stuff off your taxes anyway, man. Come on, get it on the field.
But basically, we just need support. And like Brock said, shares and just people, we need people to get excited. We need people to say, this is something worth doing.
This thing has a really cool local footprint, which I believe in. And Eric's got these cool trailer-like banners, and I took my boys to the one over at the mall. I actually took a picture by it, and the girl, true to her words, was like, you get this cool little necklace when you do it. And sure enough, she got out, and my boys loved the necklace. So it's just a really cool little universe. Dope people doing dope stuff. So get on board. Eric, thanks for hanging.
No, thanks.
Take it easy,
man.
buddy.
Have a good one.
See you. Hi guys, my name is Brock. Yes, this is the first time that we're meeting under these circumstances. I am a producer on what I think is an amazing, exciting, new thing to happen right here where we live. What we're going to continue to do is release these little shorts where we talk about this world, everything to do with this creative world. The project is going to be laid bare before you and something that you can graft into, get excited about, participate in. More to come soon.